Yitro gets a lot of press. The Ten Commandments, who can miss those? We stood up for them. There's one paragraph of this week's Torah reading that gets barely no notice at all. It's the very last paragraph. I want to pay attention to it for just a moment. We read, "Make me an altar of earth and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your sacrifices of well-being and your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I cause my name to be mentioned, I will come to you and bless you. And if you make for me an altar of stones, do not build it of hewn stones, for by wielding your sword upon them you have profaned them. And then do not descend my altar by steps, that your nakedness may not be exposed upon it." So first, a story about not making an altar of stones with hewn stones, not using the sword. There is a synagogue in Los Angeles called Or HaTorah. One of my colleagues, one of my fellow rabbinical students then was interning at Or HaTorah, and they were having a big Shabbat dinner, and he was given the task, as student rabbis often are, of making hamotzi. He arrives to this moment, there are a lot of people. He stands up to say the bracha. He says the bracha, hamotzi lecha min haaretz. And someone cries from the back of the room, "Don't take that bread of war, don't take that knife of war to my bread of peace." His face goes ashen. What are you talking about? "Don't take the knife of war to my bread of peace." He dropped the knife on the table. And actually, by the way, it's one of the reasons I like to pull apart the challah, right, as we do at Kiddush, okay? All right. There also, you should know, that's the story, but I want you to know that there are, if you are in many traditional Jewish homes where you will visit, the custom is either to remove the knife, to remove all knives from the table, when saying Birkat HaMazon, when saying the blessing, the grace after the meals, or to cover the knife. And the source for that is from what I just read to you. Rashi says, when he explains, if you make an altar of stones, do not build it of hewn stones, for by wielding your sword upon them you have profaned them. Rashi says that the purpose of the altar is ultimately life, is long life. The altar is the place where we meet God. And if the purpose of the altar is life, there is something wrong, there is something that doesn't fit if you use an implement whose sole purpose it is to shorten life, to make the altar whose purpose is to lengthen life. And remembering this disjuncture, that is the source of the person was right, I probably wouldn't have done it quite that way, but the person was expressing something deep within the tradition, which is that on Shabbat evening, the table is, according to the rabbis, a mikdash ma'at, a mini altar. That the food which we eat and the process of having a Shabbat dinner is one of the ways in which we encounter God's presence in the absence of the temple itself. And there's something that is not fitting if our tables are the altar of using knives made of metal that ultimately can be used for shortening life. The second verse, or that second part that I want to talk about, is the very last verse of the Torah portion. Velo ta'aleh b'ma'alot al mizbechi asher lo tigaleh be'ervatcha bo. Do not ascend my altar by steps, that your nakedness not be exposed upon it. The Torah gives a reason, right, that if you're I don't need to go into it. You get it, right? You don't want to lift up your knees too much if you're wearing a skirt. But the rabbis have a different explanation for this. What they say is that the altar is ultimately the place where we meet God. And you don't go up by steps, because when you go up by steps, you measure. You say, I've arrived a little bit higher. I am closer. I know exactly how far it is until I meet God. The Chidushei Arim says that rather we should ascend the altar by ramp. And the better thing about the ramp is that we don't know exactly how far we are or how close we are. And that is the appropriate mindset to have when we engage in Jewish life. Not to think to ourselves, I'm a little closer, or I'm a little bit farther, but rather to all the time say to ourselves, I'm heading in the right direction, but I don't know how much farther away or closer I have to go. To not look around at others and to say, I'm below that person or above that person, that I'm better or worse. But at each moment to be ascending. To be ascending, and in some ways never to arrive, but always to be heading towards a place in which we encounter God's presence in the world. I think this idea of not being on steps, we do need steps. We need a ladder. We need a sense of, I've accomplished something. We say the bracha over lighting Shabbat candles, and the rabbis give us a sense, I've lit Shabbat candles, I've said the bracha, I have completed that mitzvah. And that's true. And yet, it's not enough to express what it is that we seek in that moment. Because what we seek in that moment is not to be done, but to be in God's presence. And therefore, we should be always seeking and never stopping and never saying it's enough. Shabbat Shalom.